morning or good afternoon to everyone joining us. I'm Liz Priestman, and I will be your host for our webinar today. We have an hour set aside to introduce 3 companies. Everyone on today's webinar will appreciate the transformation taking place in healthcare, and all 3 of today's presenters are changing outcomes for patients, from diagnostics to surgery and therapeutics, and it's an exciting time to be here. Our first presenter is Brian Firth. Brian is the CEO of Gemin Labs, a lateral flow diagnostics company. Welcome, Brian.
Good afternoon, Liz. If I can take over, Gemin Labs is actually a diagnostics technologies company. We're listed on the CSE under the ticker GLAB. And just to make a quick introduction, the usual disclaimers about forward-looking statements. I may make a few this afternoon. You can look at that anytime you like afterwards, because I believe you can get copies of the slides. What we're talking about when we talk about Gemin Labs is actually the point of care market. The point of care market really took off in about 1985 when clear blue pregnancy tests were launched using the lateral flow technology as its base. Now, some 37 years on, the lifetime sales for clear blue sort of exceed $4 billion, and the point of care market is worth about $43 billion. And Gemin Labs is really redefining that industry using chemistry technologies to basically make diagnostics more accurate, more sensitive, cheaper, more usable in the point of care hands, and actually more accessible globally. We've assembled a sort of world-class team of diagnostics and diagnostic specialists. Top left there, Brian Firth, CEO. I've spent about 35 years in the medical diagnostics industry. Robert Green, to the right of me on this screen, is the CTO, and he's actually the inventor of the chemistry. And then we have a number of other people from the industry playing various roles across it. I mentioned that we're talking about the point of care market. The point of care market is a subset of the IVD market, the in vitro diagnostics market, which is somewhere between 97 billion and 106 billion, depending on who you ask. The point of care market is a $43 billion market. You can basically split it into 3: lateral flow diagnostics of about 11 billion, molecular diagnostics of about close to 9 billion, and the rest, 23 billion odd, is electrochemistry, mainly used in diabetes self-testing. And within those, for Gemin Labs, our chemistries basically have a sort of addressable or a market of 1.5 billion in lateral flow, 1.9 billion in molecular. And we know there's an opportunity in electrochemistry, but we haven't yet had a chance to really scale that. What Gemin chemistry really does, if I start, Liz mentioned lateral flow, and we're best known for lateral flow at the moment. If you look at what happens in lateral flow tests, and if you think back to sort of not too distant COVID-19 problem, you will remember people talking about tests not being sensitive enough, not picking up Omicron, not picking up different variants. There's lots of studies in the press that looks at lateral flow and really explains why. And the problem's this: what you actually want is antibody sprayed in a line that's all standing in the right orientation. So on this slide, it's that sort of picture of the 4 Ys looking like sort of a rugby line out, all standing with their arms in the air. What you actually get when you spray antibody onto nitrocellulose is you get the right-hand picture, which is some of your antibodies is standing upright, some of it's lying down, some of it's upside down. And in fact, what the research shows, something between 15 and 25% of your antibody is actually effective when you spray it down. The other 75 to 85% doesn't do anything for your test. And that really is the nub of the sensitivity problem in lateral flow. What Gemin's solution is to be done is using surface chemistry is to produce a linker, a binder, a double-edged binder that basically makes all those antibodies stand upright, and therefore you get 100% of your antibody effective. To put that in concept, to prove the technology, just at the tail end of COVID, we put this chemistry onto a COVID test and proved that we could get exactly the same sensitivity as the #1 seller in Europe, Where when we were using arterial nasal swabbing, that's where you just tickle the bottom of your nose, as opposed to tickling the back of your skull. So we know it makes a fundamental difference. And it makes a difference in nasal swabbing, it makes a difference in urines, it makes a difference in bloods. How the chemistry actually works is this. We build sort of dual affinity binders. So we have something at the top of the binder, a linker, and then a bottom binder. The top binder can be tuned to actually connect to anything. So it can connect to antibodies in the case of lateral flow. It can connect to DNA in the case of molecular tests. It can be used for any type of target that you're going for. And then the bottom binder can actually be tuned to attach to any surface material. Traditionally in lateral flow, that's nitrocellulose. And nitrocellulose is a particularly bad material, difficult to make, in short supply. In fact, you may remember during the COVID pandemic, the world actually ran out of nitrocellulose and therefore couldn't make any more tests, which is part of the reason some countries didn't get any. In the case of Gemin chemistry, you could actually tune that bottom binder so you could actually make lateral flow tests run on paper. And that's always been the holy grail of lateral flow testing, but it's never really been possible until now. I should probably point out at that point, my earliest career has been, a lot of my career has been spent in lateral flow, particularly with clear blue pregnancy tests. So I spent a lot of time trying to make antibodies stick to nitrocellulose and other things. So the bottom binders can actually be tuned to stick to anything. And in fact, we're working with people doing lateral flow tests, making them stick to nitrocellulose, to paper, but we're also working with other companies where we're making the binders stick to graphite, glass, polymers, etc. Now we have a sort of chemistry portfolio that we started in lateral flow with EMT33. That's the one that makes the difference to the COVID tests, and actually goes beyond there for lateral flow in general and is being used now across a multitude of products. But now, right down the bottom of that list, through the suite of chemistries that we're working on beyond, we have one called GL21. GL21 is actually a chemistry that will be used for molecular tests, and it's tuned to make DNA extraction much more simple, making maybe the possibility of truly mobile molecular actually possible. So an ongoing development portfolio of different chemistries, all based around the sort of dual linker patent family that we have. I mean, I have two of those. We've got a third patent just about to be launched. And we'll carry on developing new linkers and new chemistries, really the aim to change the face of diagnostics. As I say, making them either much cheaper to build. In the case of lateral flow tests, if you can make 100% of your antibody actually work or effective on your test, you have a choice. You can either have more sensitivity, or you can have the same sensitivity as you had before, but using 75% less antibody. And when you consider antibodies can cost anything between $10 a milligram and $1,500 a milligram, often the antibody is the most expensive part of the test. Challenges are different when you start looking at molecular tests. There, it's much more about, can you actually extract the DNA without putting it through lots of different lysing processes. The way we work as a company, we do make some of our own tests, and we may do in the future, but actually increasingly we're a licensing company. We license our technology into the much bigger companies. And just to show you how that works, what we have is a sort of typical deal structure that's an upfront access fee, and then material that's supplied, so we supply as a price per milligram. That's both the cost of the supply of the material plus the license fee on top, and the license fee varies depending on what your test and antibody or your target, your DNA, etc., is, and where you're wanting to use it. So, you know, how many different countries around the world you want to use it. Maybe an easier way to understand that is actually if we boil it down to what's our revenue per test. Remember, if I use lateral flow as an example, antibodies in the lateral flow world could cost anything between $10 per milligram and $1,500 a milligram. So at the very lowest end, we typically take 50% of the antibody savings as a guideline. So at the bottom end, we are getting maybe half a cent per test. But at the top end, the highest price we get is about 15 cents a test. And currently, our pipeline average is somewhere between 4 cents and 6 cents a test. Even at half a cent a test, our gross margins are 75%. Right? So we're very high margin and a sort of repeat revenue business, because of course, once you're on somebody's test, you don't tend to come off it again until that test comes off the market. Our typical license sizes are somewhere between small 10 million, medium 100 million, large 500 million, and very large, I should say, is 2 billion. That's, when I say small, that's the size of the diagnostic companies. So small diagnostic companies doing about 10 million tests a year, medium doing about 100 million, large diagnostic companies doing about 500 million, and the very largest diagnostic companies in the world doing about 2 billion tests a year. And that's just in lateral flow. We tend to target the large, i.e. people doing 500 million tests. Somewhere between 3 and 500 million tests would be our normal sweet spot. Doesn't mean we do less, and it doesn't mean we do more. And currently in our pipeline, there's about 22 billion lateral flow tests done around the world every year. We have about 25% of them in our pipeline. We have just signed our first big license agreement. We have another 4 now at the sort of CDA stage or NDA stage and entering evaluation, another 5 behind that. So we have in total about 25% of the lateral flow tests in that pipeline. We've got about 2% of them actually contracted, another sort of between 4 and 6% actually entering CDA stage, because 2 more have entered since this slide was actually produced. So in summary, we're building a significant bioscience tool company. We have unique patented technologies with clinical and industry validation. We have a focused strategy starting with improvements to lateral flow, as Liz mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, but we're now moving into molecular diagnostic improvements, which means our addressable market is somewhere about 3.4 billion. We're now generating commercial traction with the first license deal signed and 20% of the addressable market already in discussions. Our business model is based on several routes to profitable revenue with at least 75% margins. And currently, there's very strong tailwinds for us as a company in the current markets. And lastly, we have an experienced management team with significant experience of building diagnostics and diagnostics technology companies. We are actually just starting a financial raise that will probably go formal in the next week or so. And that's really the introduction to us.
Brian, thank you. That was a terrific presentation, and what a perfect background being at driving the growth of the Clear Blue pregnancy test to merge into diagnostics with Gemin Labs. One of the questions that has come in is related to revenue. So it sounds like you've just signed some commercial agreements, which is exciting for the company. When do you anticipate revenue generation?
We should see our first revenue. We'll see our first revenues this calendar year. Okay. And then with a significant climb in revenues in 2025. Okay. So we'll see our first revenues this year. And then we'll really start seeing significant growth from next year onwards.
Okay, super. Thank you. Another question that was asked is related to the recent signing of a new partner or commercial agreement. Have you disclosed who the commercial agreement is with?
No, we haven't, and that's because some of the partners that we're working with, the impact our technology makes is so significant to what they're doing. They don't really want anybody to know what they're actually doing at the moment until they've actually launched the product. So.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. And in terms of Gemin Labs, it's obviously during COVID, the Western world all had access to COVID tests. Yep. How is Gemin Labs going to impact other markets on a global stage?
I think there's 2 things there, Liz. The first is that actually the global stage is changing phenomenally. I mean, particularly in Asia and Southeast Asia, particularly. We've got millions and millions of people entering the sort of what we might call the middle class here, who can now afford healthcare. But in their models, it's very much more about self-pay. So they don't have NHS systems. They don't necessarily have insurance systems yet, so they're having to pay for it themselves. So you're seeing a mega demand for diagnostics because it makes the doctor's time more efficient, therefore the whole system more affordable. But at the same time, what you're seeing is those countries not wanting to rely on diagnostics from anywhere else in the world, because what they saw was suddenly during COVID supplies stopping. So one of the things that immunochemistry does is allows, for example, in lateral flow, something that we call the universal test architecture, where in fact you just spray the Gemin technology onto the test strip. You put the antibodies for your test, particularly into a bead, and then you get two benefits there. One, you can actually stockpile cartridges, raw lateral flow cartridges that are just got immunochemistry on them, and then you add the bead to the test at the point where you want to test for something. So you can add the bead later on. That does two things. One, you can keep up with changes in disease states or conditions much faster. So as like COVID mutates, you can keep up with it. But secondly, you can produce tests in a much more efficient way. Normally, lateral flow tests are often lateral flow tests, particularly for things like French, they're produced in factories that do hundreds of millions of tests a year in China. In this case, you can have a process that's efficient at 1 million tests a month. So you can put a complete manufacturing process in a container and you can site it in the Philippines or in Pakistan or in wherever you want it. And therefore, countries can have their own manufacturing capability. So they're not then subjected to potential cuts in supply. They also cut out shipping costs. So it makes it more affordable for southern Saharan Africa, etc. So that whole process is what we're enabling.
Right. Really making diagnostics accessible.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Terrific. Thank you. It's a great presentation and very exciting time for Gemini Labs. Brian, appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yeah. Pleasure.
Thank you. Our next presentation comes from Michael Schappel. Michael is the SVP of Corporate Development at CareSyntax, and he's going to share updates from the company and introduce their story.
Doing it a second time. Sorry for the slight delay. Zoom didn't let me do what I wanted to. Absolute pleasure being here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share more about CareSyntax. And CareSyntax is focusing on an industry which is surgery. And the reason for that is very simple. It is a massive market, about $1 trillion in Europe, about $1 trillion in the US. It is growing extremely steadily. It is also the financial heart of a health institution, generating more than 50%, up to 70% of a health facility's revenue. But at the same time, it is also an area of massive costs if you do not contain risks and complications. And that is particularly why our vision is to make surgery smarter and safer, to help the patients and the caregivers when it matters most. And we do that by converging AI-powered software, devices, and clinical services to help our customers improve surgical outcomes. We're extremely fortunate to collaborate with the change makers around the world. And through these collaborations, we were able to deploy our solutions in more than 3,000 operating rooms so far. More than 3 million patients are going through our platform on an annual basis. We were able to structure and curate over 750 million data points out of structured data, as well as out of unstructured data, such as videos, op notes, and images. And with that and the trust that our customers put into us, we're exceeding our financial metrics year on year and are on a massive growth trajectory. We are backed by renowned investors in this field, from PFM, which is very much focused on surgery, then BlackRock, Reliance on the medical malpractice insurer side, and many others. And how do we actually do that? Well, we bring together information outside of the operating room, such as the electronic medical record, laboratory information system, radiology information system, supply chain, and many other systems. And then we integrate everything inside of the operating room, from the medical devices, the scopes, the room cameras, the robotic arms, the ventilators, and enable this structured and curated data flow, which we bring together in what we call the high-fidelity surgical record. This patient-centric high-fidelity surgical record is injected into our data-driven AI surgery platform. Automation, analytics, and AI is applied so that we clearly can improve clinical outcomes, but at the same time improve operational and financial efficiency. And given that the surgery room is the financial heart of a health institution, all eyes are particularly on making that particular extremely expensive asset as effective as possible. And when you bring these data points together, you're enabling a lot of other use cases. And for the faint-hearted, there will be a little bit of videos coming up soon. But if you are not necessarily, into that, please close your eyes. But when you do that, you have the possibility of utilizing computer vision, AI, bring the data together to support, for example, surgeons during the procedure. What you do see here is in a laparoscopic procedure, on the upper left, you see a little traffic light, guidance for the surgeon that if you see the tip of the instrument, it is obviously safe to set the clip. If you don't see it, you have the possibility of rupturing an organ, a nerve, something behind that. So it's not taking the decision away from the surgeon, it's more a safety net that is being provided. Or you utilize technology to do automatic face detection. So in this case particular, it also analyzes what particular medical device is being used. With that, it enables the different care providers along the surgical continuum to prepare what is needed for the next phase of surgery, so that you eliminate any potential delays, which are obviously increasing the risk for surgical site infections, for complications, readmission, and so on and so forth. So trying to streamline also during the procedure. And something that we are very much familiar with when it comes to other industries, such as sports, is really analysis of what is possible, but we haven't done that yet so far in the healthcare setting. And that is exactly where we are focusing on. So for example, you want to make sure that none of the consumables, devices are being left inside the patient doing the automatic counting. You want to understand how the process flow could be potentially optimized in the operating room, and many other things to really ensure that you're supporting the OR nurses, the surgeons, and then the entire care team as best as possible with relevant technology to improve patient outcomes and deliver safer and smarter surgery. And if you were to do that, you actually impact also a lot of the financial metrics for health institutions, such as increasing the utilization of the OR. And on average, we see about an 8% increase in cases that can be done with a particular OR. It's also reducing the delays that potentially can happen, particularly first time to start delays, which have a ripple effect throughout the entire day. If you were to be able to eliminate them, you have definitely a positive impact, not only on the financial proposition, but also on throughput and particularly what surgeries can be performed that particular day. And it's also about reducing complications. It's impacting positively the opioid use, making sure that you have a net margin improvement per case where there were potentially some changes on the coding side that negatively impacted that. So gaining the insights that you can take informed decisions to improve surgical care provision. As outlined before, we have great collaborators, and we are currently in a hyper-growth state, more than doubling year on year on the revenue side. And when it comes to contracted ARR and backlog, as well as bookings, are on a massive growth trajectory and are continuing to do that. And one of the aspects that is supporting that particular growth is that we are widening massively in the AVG within our existing client base. Because of the value that is being created and the stickiness of the solution, we see that we are growing our individual account contribution quite substantially, more than almost tripling since 2021 to 2023. And we do see that this trajectory will continue over the next years. And we are also fortunate to onboard many new customers on an annual basis. And these customers are really the catalyzers for additional growth. And the more happy your customers are, the more new logos we will be able to onboard. So we are quite fortunate with a very low churn due to the stickiness and the value that is being created. We have basically three different business models or three different recurring revenue streams. One is via universal credits, and you see some examples of companies that are using that in a similar fashion. We have a B2B software as a service model, which is the core, And often it's an OR-based pricing where we can add additional modules from our platform into that. And then depending on the geography, you also have different licenses and different consumers of these licenses. That can be from particular data license and many other aspects of value creation beyond the pure surgery setting in the operating room and towards other consumers such as medtech companies, such as medical malpractice insurers, and many others. We are also glad that this great work that the team is doing and that is led by our founders, Björn von Siemens and Dennis Kogan, who started the company about a decade ago, is externally recognized from the World Economic Forum over Milken and recently also to the FIRS 15. And that would not be possible without focusing on what really matters when it comes to healthcare, and that is pushing the boundaries. So we're actively engaging into research with various collaborators around the world. We have clearly a very strong clinical advisory board and are collaborating on new initiatives with one of the most renowned healthcare institutions on the planet. And we're publishing these findings in order to advance surgery as much as possible and as fast as possible, as it is a highly complex field with massive growth trajectory and potential. And maybe one day we all will feel as comfortable getting into an operating room than we are feeling today, getting into an airplane. Thank you very much for the time.
From the perspective of the patient and the surgeon, so two different participants in the process, what are the advantages to them and benefits that CareSyntax offers?
Sure. I mean, if we were to look at the patient side, realistically, we all want to get the best possible care and ideally with the lowest possible risk profile so that we undergo surgery and are on the path to recovery very quickly. We also have to understand that the need to undergo surgery is typically because there is a medical condition that requires such an intervention. So the more confidence we have in the team, in the facility, in the surgeon that is performing the procedure, the technology that is actually being utilized, the more at ease we will be in this very high intense and, let's say, stressful state. In addition to that, the more we focus on high quality, depending on the geography, for example, in the United States, there is a direct cost impact also on the patient, which we do not see as much, for example, in Europe. But that is one of the aspects. So confidence and then cost basis, depending on where you are. When we look at the surgeon, there are different value propositions. I think one of the interesting aspects with surgery in particular is that surgeons have a mantra of see one, do one, teach one. And that is something that you do not see in too many other professions, which also means the more you can actually teach and educate young and upcoming surgeons, the more it helps to elevate that entire field. So with our technology, we are clearly enabling that. We are enabling the teaching more, but at the same time to also improve your own care provision and your surgical skills. And that is, I think, one of the other value propositions. Plus, sometimes, and surgery is a high intense environment, sometimes you want to have the safety net. And the technology that enables that and really provide the relevant information at the right point in time is what we are doing, so that you can focus on, as a surgeon, on what you're really good at, which is performing the surgery, not worry about all the other things that simply should flow. But in the current state, a lot of health facilities are locked into different silos and don't enable that.
Okay, super. Thank you. Another question that's come in is you collect a lot of data, you leverage a lot of data for the surgeries. Does CareSyntax own the data?
Well, realistically, always the patient should own the data, right? But then when it comes to an anonymized form, and that is particularly important to train the algorithms, that is something that we are utilizing to advance the different algorithms that we're developing either ourselves or that we're actually co-developing with health institutions. And we have different examples of that, such as a risk prediction algorithm for surgical site infections that was co-developed with a large health institution in the Middle East. And in addition to that, you also see that this real-world data and real-world evidence is becoming of increasing importance for medtech companies after they have launched their medical devices to increase utilization and adoption, obviously also for post-market surveillance, but we see it now earlier and earlier into the clinical trial stage. And the more structured this data is, the better the outcomes can actually be. We currently have, together with B. Brown, a clinical trial ongoing for TKA, so total knee arthroplasty. And the importance there to include, in addition to the data that can be captured inside the operating room, also the patient-reported outcomes and patient-reported experience measures over a specific period of time that provides the insights of what you can really do. But ultimately, the individual data should be owned by the patient, but then aggregated and normalized level, that is clearly something that can be very much utilized and monetized.
And to the benefit of everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael. You touched on the 3 platforms for CareSyntax. Would you mind just elaborating a little bit more on those 3 platforms?
Sure, absolutely. I think the first platform is more about how can you eliminate any variance that you currently have with respect to utilizing the operating room. So it's about making sure that you optimize the schedules, make sure that you eliminate any delays, that you predict potential cancellations, that you're having specific backups that actually can fill that the blocks that you might allocate to external surgeons are actually utilized effectively, and not this big black box, which is allocated, but then ultimately 20, 30, 40% of the time is only being used. So you want to do that when it comes to the analytics side and really drill into the details of eliminating variance. The second aspect is connected surgery. And in connected surgery, we are looking at how can you ensure that you eliminate these data silos along the surgical continuum, and particularly inside the operating room. Because so far, you have 90+% of the data that is generated inside of the operating room staying there. And that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us to improve the care that is being delivered. So the connected surgery approach is really ensuring that the data from all these different devices inside the operating room, in combination with information from different systems, information systems that are being utilized in a healthcare setting, are being brought together. With that, you can do also a specific routing of video signals at the different screens where it is needed. You can ensure that you are then providing the relevant guidance to the OR nurses to prepare what should happen next in the surgery. You have real-time clinical decision support through edge computing power that we co-developed with Intel and put into the operating room. And that really changes the way that care is being provided, and provides also the opportunity for massively reducing risks and complications. And the last part is going into value-based insights. So once you have this data flow in a structured, clinically curated way, you try to eliminate all the variance that you can, then it's really going into how can we now improve the care provision from a value-based standpoint. So really understanding where you can tweak, where you can use different devices, meshes, procedures, techniques to really get a better outcome for the patient. What we also sometimes see is that it's very much a project-based approach where customers have a feeling that there's something going not the right way, but they really can't pinpoint on what is the root cause and how they can change that. So it's really getting these insights out to improve massively the value for everybody involved in the ecosystem.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, and on that note, if we're looking into the future at the operating theater, what do you see? What does that transformation look like, and how does CareSyntax fit into that picture?
Well, I made the analogy to the aviation space and many other industries earlier that it's a fully system integrated approach, and that is what we are driving forward into surgery. And I think we are at the forefront, maybe the only platform across the entire surgical continuum to enable that. I also believe it's an ecosystem approach. So we are not the ones that are doing these massively complex medical devices, right? They are needed, but they have to collaborate in unity with everybody involved in the system. I think the future of the operating room is back to the point of making it personal and emotional, providing more confidence that there are not these horror stories that you hear, the wrong foot was amputated or the wrong finger was operated, and that we really have full confidence into this operating room will function as best as possible to really do what is needed because of the medical condition that the intervention is warranted for, and that we feel very much comfortable. But at the same time, due to the shortage of surgeons and nurses that we have around the world to free up the time for them to focus on where they can add the biggest value, but let technology do what technology is good at.
Yeah, brilliant. It's an exciting future. Michael Schelper, thank you so much for joining us today and introducing us to CareSyntax. I appreciate that and wish you guys all the best of luck as you continue to grow the business and expand internationally. Our next presenter, thanks, Michael. Our next and final presenter is Stephen Shallcross. Stephen is the CEO, CFO, and director of Theva Bioscience.
Can you guys see the screen here?
We can. If you want to just switch to, full screen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And a thank you to the London Stock Exchange for giving us the opportunity to share the Theva Biologics story with you today. I will be making some forward-looking statements, so I'll refer you to our securities filings for all of the appropriate disclosure. We believe that Theva is doing some pretty exciting things. We're an oncolytic virus company, and I think one of the huge differentiators from what we're doing and how we separate ourselves from other folks in the field is that our therapy has been engineered to be delivered systemically. And I think as I go through the story here, you understand why that's so very important. We're in the middle of a phase 2 clinical trial in first-line metastatic pancreatic cancer. And our treatment is meant to be used in combination with other types of therapies. In the case of the pancreatic cancer trial, it's standard of care chemotherapy. And in this trial, we're using the combination of gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel. We also have completed a number of phase 1 studies in other indications. I'll touch on those very, very briefly today, and we'll spend most of our time talking about the phase 2 pancreatic cancer trial. And we do, in fact, have a R&D platform where our team is working on products for the future. We're an NYSE American listed company, ticker's TOVX. When we reported last quarter, we had a little over 18 million in the bank with a projected runway through Q1 of 2025. And obviously, we expect to update that guidance when we report out our second quarter numbers. We have offices in Rockville, Maryland, and offices and laboratories in Barcelona, Spain. Our shareholder base is a combination of institutional and retail. Our largest institutional shareholder is MSD Capital. That's Michael Dell's fund. And on a fully converted basis, they're about a 12% shareholder. The management team is also committed to our treatment and what we're doing. The management team owns collectively around 6% of the company. And up until recently, including last year, I myself have been buying stock in the open market as well as a number of folks on our management team. So what is it that we have here? And then we'll talk specifically about the technology related to VCN-01. As I stated at the onset, we have an ongoing phase 2 trial in pancreatic cancer. We just recently put out a press release where we completed enrollment in a retinoblastoma trial in pediatric patients. We're not going to talk about that today, but I'll refer you to our press releases and our securities filings for more details on the outcome of that trial. Last October, we put out some data at ESMO on a head and neck cancer study using our treatment in combination with durvalumab, which is a checkpoint inhibitor. These patients were refractory, or in other words, they failed multiple rounds, up to 7 rounds of checkpoint inhibitor therapy. They were expected to live about 4 to 7 months. After they were giving our treatment and resensitized in an N of 20, we had a survival rate of about 17 months, and we still have 2 patients living, one that's going on 4+ years. We also have ongoing studies in brain cancer study at the University of Leeds and a study at UPenn and Carl June's lab using our treatment in combination with their meso-CAR T-cell therapies in ovarian and pancreatic cancer patients. I mentioned briefly our development pipeline. We have a couple legacy assets, SYN4, which is an oral form of beta-lactamase used in combination with IV antibiotics to treat neutropenic fever in bone marrow transplant patients and to be used as a preventative in acute graft-versus-host disease. We plan to present some data in our second cohort of that study in the second half of this year. And we have an oral form of intestinal alkaline phosphatase, SYN20. That program is in the process of being licensed out. So what is it that we have and why is it so unique when we look at the other products that are being developed today? First and foremost, our product's been engineered to be delivered systemically. And that's important because number one, and when I say systemic delivery, I mean by IV. So not only once the treatment is delivered, does it target the primary tumor, but it also, while circulating through the patient's blood system, targets the metastases. And these are the lesions that ultimately, result in these patients dying. So it's not only, the primary tumor, but it's the complexities and the problems associated with the metastases that cause the cancer to spread throughout the body. The other important fact is that this allows us to deliver the treatment in very high doses, 1 × 10⁻13. No one else is delivering at such a high level. And that's important because it helps us prevent this issue with neutralizing antibodies. In other words, the body's immune system from targeting the treatment. It's very selective. It only replicates in tumor cells. It detargets the liver. So we have a very safe product, which has been a problem for these types of treatments historically. But more importantly, once the virus starts to replicate, it releases an enzyme called hyaluronidase or PH20. And that's very important for these types of patients because these solid tumors encase themselves along with the fibrous material that surrounds those tumor cells. And in order for these treatments to effectively penetrate and start working, we need to break up that material, and that's what PH20 does. Another important point in this product is that it's self-replicating. We have a built-in biomarker, so as the virus replicates, we know it's working, and we can measure that activity in the patient's own blood. This is some proof of concept data that was generated in demonstrating that we could turn these cold tumors hot. This is from our phase 1 study. This chart on the left here was data generated that shows the virus replication in the patient's blood. And as the virus replicates, we know it's attacking the tumor cells. And again, you could see at day 0 when we were dosed, we don't see the activity, but as time passes, we see the replication in the generation of PH20. So we know that the treatment is doing what it's supposed to do. And then we've also been able to look at a number of biomarkers to see an inflammatory response. Typically, we look at CD8, IDO, and PD-L1. But what's more remarkable here is that these biopsies were generated in the metastases. So not in the primary tumor, but in the metastases. So we know that this treatment is working, again, not only to target the primary tumor, but the metastases. Many of you probably know folks that have pancreatic cancer or have died from pancreatic cancer. It's an orphan disease. Once you're diagnosed, the median survival is 8 to 11 months on average. In the US in 2022, there are over 60,000 new cases and 50,000 deaths. That continues to grow. The numbers are very similar in Europe, and we do know for a fact that these numbers continue to increase. I mentioned that we have this issue of trying to break down the stroma. On the right side here, you could see a biopsy of a pancreatic cancer tumor, and you can see this very fibrous material. that integrates itself with the tumor cells. That's made of hyaluronic acid. Our treatment releases hyaluronidase, which breaks down hyaluronic acid. And not only does that help with the body's own immune system to kick in, but then for us to deliver other treatments to allow for these tumor cells to be destroyed. The incidence, again, continues to grow. The market's very large today, and by 2030, it's going to be in excess of $7 billion. We ran a phase 1 study, and this gave us the confidence to advance to a phase 2 study. There was 3 arms. The first arm was monotherapy. This was done to just evaluate safety and tolerability, as well as to try to establish the right dose. Then we dosed the patients, one together with chemotherapy, and then second sequentially. So what did we learn from this? So here's the high-level data. When we look at standard care alone, this is just chemotherapy. We see a response rate of about 23%. Response rate means a reduction in primary tumor masses of 30% or greater. We saw a median survival of about 8.5 months. But when you look at the program that we laid out in our phase 1 study, and you combine the high and low doses and then delivering the treatment together and sequentially, we saw the response rate immediately jump to 50% and a median survival of 13.5 months. But what's more impressive is that we also saw a dose response. So at the highest dose here, we saw about a 21-month survival rate and an 83% response rate and a 21 month or so survival rate. So this gave us the confidence to move forward. The safety profile is very positive here. The most common safety effect that we observed was flu-like symptoms in these patients, and those symptoms tended to resolve pretty rapidly. Our KOLs have told us that if we could demonstrate in a larger study that overall survival increases to 15 months or more, that we have a viable product for the market. So this is the design of our phase 2 study that's ongoing. It's a multi-center, open-label, randomized controlled study. It's ongoing. These are newly diagnosed pancreatic cancer patients. It's a 92-patient study, and we're enrolling patients in Spain and the US. It's randomized 1-to-1. And if you look at this chart down below, arm 1 is standard of care. So this is combination chemotherapy, again, gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel. And then the treatment arm is first getting the VCN-01 product, and then 7 days later, we start them on standard of care chemo. What's unique about this trial design as well is that 3 months out, we're delivering another dose of VCN-01. Nobody has ever done this in a human clinical trial before. So as we announced recently, we are projecting to complete enrollment in this study in the 3rd quarter of 2024. So we're almost there. We had a data safety monitoring committee meeting at the end of 2023, and we reported this out in the 1st quarter of 2024. And when that committee met, they confirmed that there were no safety concerns. As a matter of fact, the safety profile was consistent with what we observed in our phase 1 study, but more importantly, they did not request any protocol amendments to the trial itself. We expect to be in a position to do some data analysis in the second half. We will use that opportunity to then go talk to the regulatory authorities, both in the EU as well as at the FDA, to see about the possibility of converting this phase 2 study into a pivotal or a phase 3 study. And that could give us the opportunity to have conditional approval with a commitment to enroll X number of more patients. We won't know what that patient size would look like until we have more data from this trial and we actually meet with the regulatory authorities. We're also looking at opportunities to combine our product with other forms of chemotherapy that are currently available both in the US and in the EU. This is a list of our milestones looking out through the remainder of the year. In the second quarter, we've achieved many of these already. The SYN-4 trial, the last bullet point under Q2, we've just completed that enrollment. And as you see in Q3 and Q4, it's going to be a number of opportunities for us to announce the completion of the enrollment in the phase 2 study in pancreatic cancer, discuss potentially some of the data that we've collected, and then also the data in the second cohort of our SYN-4 study, and then looking out through the remainder of the year, the outcome of discussions with the FDA and EMA on the results that we're observing so far in pancreatic cancer, and then we'll have some news flow on some of our other products that are in earlier stage of development. Thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Stephen, thank you. It's a terrific presentation, and for anyone watching that has been impacted, by pancreatic cancer, it's a very, dire diagnosis. So thank you for the work that you guys are doing. It's important. What are the challenges with patient enrollment, given the lifespan that's ahead for patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer? What holds people back from signing on immediately for the patient enrollment?
So that's actually an interesting observation, because what makes this trial design so unique for us is that our treatment is additive to standard of care treatment. So we're having ample opportunity to enroll patients. We've got 9 sites, clinical sites in Spain, and we've got 7 in the US. So when the patients come into these sites and they're looking for opportunities to participate in a clinical trial, in other words, get something hopefully that's more beneficial than standard of care treatment, we tend to get the opportunity, to enroll these types of patients without, any hesitation. So there's an education process that we go through once the patients contact the clinical sites, but more common is that once they hear the opportunity, because this disease is so devastating, they want to get involved and participate in this trial. What we're trying to do, in addition, is collect data on quality of life. And patients that go through chemotherapy, it's very difficult and very painful. And a lot of time, these patients end up on, various forms of strong pain medication. And what we've observed in our previous trial, and we hope to see the same type of observation in this phase 2, is that when they get treated with VCN-01 and then they start the chemotherapy, we tend to see that they're not experiencing the same types of level of pain and discomfort that they would just under the standard of care. We're trying to measure that analytically, and we'll hope to have something to talk about once this trial is completed along those lines.
Thank you. And once the trial's completed, like best case scenario, when could patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer hope to get access to Theva's solutions?
So typically when you're doing drug development, there's 3 phases that you need to go through. Phase 1, safety and some dosing. Phase 2 is testing the efficacy of the product. And then usually phase 3 studies, and depending on the type of therapeutic indication, sometimes 2 phase 3 studies. But since this is an orphan drug indication, the agencies allow you to shorten that as long as you can continue to demonstrate adequate safety and efficacy. So our strategy here is to convince the regulators, based on the data that we're generating, to convert this phase 2 into a phase 3 study, a pivotal study, by enrolling more patients, and to receive some form of conditional approval, assuming the data holds up, that we could get this to patients much more quickly. We hope that this trial demonstrates numbers that are close to what we saw in the phase 1. by continuing to enroll, we hope to get that done if it's converted to a pivotal, sometime by, mid-2026. And if the data again holds up, this product could be, on the market as soon as 2027 sometime.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's exciting. That's really exciting. Stephen, you've used that phrase a couple of times, an orphan disease. Can you just share with our audience exactly what you mean by that?
So when an indication is designated as being an orphan disease, it means that there's a relatively small number of patients that are afflicted by this disease, and because of that, there's more of a sense of urgency to advance treatments as quickly as possible. Obviously, you still have to go through the clinical studies. We've been granted orphan drug designation in the EU and by the FDA for this. And by having orphan drug designation, there's some benefits there. It allows you to have some more frequent discussions with the regulatory agencies. But then there's some market exclusivity, benefits that you get as well once the product is actually approved.
Okay, super. Steve, we've got time for one last question. I know Theva is working on more than pancreatic cancer. Can you touch on a little bit of the other work the company is doing?
So we just recently announced that we completed the enrollment of a study in retinoblastoma. These are pediatric patients that essentially have a very devastating form of eye cancer. There's no approved treatments for retinoblastoma today. Those patients are typically treated with various forms of chemotherapy, and they're delivered either directly into the eye, through the arteries, feeding the eye, or systemically. We had an opportunity in this phase 1 study to see if we could help these kids as a last resort. So again, these are patients that were refractory to chemotherapy. And this is important because when they fail chemotherapy treatment, the eyes typically end up getting inoculated and removed. And that's the reason for that is because the cancer can spread from the eye to the brain. And once it spreads to the brain, the prognosis for survival goes down dramatically. So we, in this very small study, 9 patients, had an opportunity to treat patients as a last resort. We prevented the enucleation in 3 of 9 patients, although we collected a lot of great data in the other patients. And in one case in particular, we have a pediatric patient that went into full remission and has been cancer-free in their eye for over 3.5 years already.
Wonderful.
I mentioned very briefly the head and neck study. These are refractory patients that were being treated with checkpoint inhibitors. The data that was presented at ESMO last October demonstrated that we have the ability to resensitize the tumors so that they can be treated subsequently again with new rounds of checkpoint inhibitors and chemotherapy. And we've seen some really promising results. We saw, expected survival after failing these treatments of 4 to 7 months jump up to over 17. And again, we have 2 patients that are still living.
Wonderful. That's so encouraging. Stephen, thank you. And thank you as well to Gemin Labs and CareSyntax and of course Theva for the presentations today. Appreciate you joining us, and watch for the recordings back on the London Stock Exchange's site.